What if the whole idea of progress, the thing we generally assume is good, is actually a sign of decline?
That's a pretty radical thought to start with, isn't it?
It really is. And that's the core question we're tackling today as we dive into René Guénon's book, The Crisis of the Modern World. This was translated by Arthur Osborne, published back in 1942.
Right. And our mission here is to really unpack Guénon's main argument. He's not just saying the modern world has challenges like temporary problems.
No, he's saying it's in a fundamental crisis.
Exactly. A crisis rooted in a very specific historical path, a specific way of thinking that developed over time.
So we'll explore his ideas about, cyclical history, which is different from our usual linear view, and this big divergence he sees between East and West.
Mm-hmm. And his critique of modern science, modern society, it's quite pointed.
It really is. It's a perspective that might just make you look at, everything happening today in a totally new way.
Definitely a challenging lens.
Okay, so let's jump in. Guénon starts with this concept he borrows from Hindu doctrine, right? The Kali Yuga, the Dark Age.
That's right, the Kali Yuga.
What exactly does he mean by that? And how does he connect it to the modern world we live in?
So Guénon lays out this idea that human history, or what he calls a human cycle, isn't just a straight line. It's divided into 4 periods.
4 periods, okay.
And the Kali Yuga is the 4th one, the last one. He calls it a Dark Age.
Dark how?
Characterized by a gradual materialization, that's his term, and a sort of obscuring, a covering over of what he calls primordial spirituality.
So like losing touch with deeper truths, moving towards stuff.
Pretty much. Moving further and further from the origin, the spiritual principle, towards matter. And he actually argued, even back when he first wrote this in 1926, that events were unfolding at an ever-increasing speed.
An acceleration. He saw things speeding up.
Yeah, speeding up towards the end of the cycle. An acceleration of this decline, this materialization.
Wow. Okay, so that flips our usual narrative completely because concepts we value, like progress.
For Guénon, that's a complete negation of the actual direction history is taking in this phase. It's denying the downward trend.
So he thinks the modern world has no privileged position in history. It's not the pinnacle.
Not at all. He explicitly says it may not always go on developing in the same direction. It's just one phase, and for him, it's the final declining phase.
That's a fundamental challenge to how we see ourselves.
Absolutely. He's saying our whole framework of linear progress is an illusion, a symptom of the very decline it denies. This fall, he defines it as progressive materialization, starting from pure spirit, moving towards pure matter.
And the word crisis, he means more than just temporary trouble then.
Oh, much more. For him, the word itself implies we're at a critical point, a turning point, that a more or less complete transformation is imminent.
A transformation.
Yeah.
Like the end of the cycle.
Potentially. But the crucial thing is, the crisis isn't just one event, like a war or a crash. It's the modern epoch as a whole. This entire period is the anomaly, the disorder, within a much larger cosmic order.
Okay, so this whole modern era is the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, marked by accelerating decline towards materialism.
That's the foundation of his argument, yes.
Given that backdrop, he then draws this really sharp contrast. He talks about an unmistakable gulf between Eastern and Western civilizations. How does he define that difference? Why is it so important for his idea of the crisis?
Yeah, he argues there's a fundamental opposition. It's not just superficial customs. It's in the very mentality.
An opposition in how people think.
Exactly. He says Oriental civilizations, his term, have largely remained faithful to the traditional standpoint.
Meaning?
Meaning they still recognize a higher source of knowledge, something beyond the purely human, a primordial tradition, you could say. They see no higher principle than that original source.
Okay, sticking to the roots. And the West.
The West, which he basically defines as Europe and America, has, lost that connection. It's gone in a different direction entirely.
He talks a lot about this primordial tradition, doesn't he? Like it's this ancient wisdom.
Yes, he suggests it has elements from way back. He mentions Atlantis, Hyperborea, even early Celtic traditions, things he believes the East kept alive in various forms.
But the West forgot them. Or ignored them.
Largely forgotten or lost, according to Guénon. He's actually quite harsh. He talks about Western pseudo-traditions and modern confusion taking the place of real principles.
Pseudo-traditions? Like what?
He even criticizes Western occultists, saying they sometimes create these weird mixtures, incongruous elements, and invent an imaginary Eastern tradition that isn't authentic.
Wow, so even things that look traditional in the West might not be, in his view. What about Christianity?
He argues that even Western tradition, including Christianity as it's commonly practiced now, has lost its connection to those deeper spiritual roots. It's become more of a mere aspiration, he says, rather than a complete loving path to that primordial knowledge.
He actually says Christianity itself in our time is no longer understood in its profound meaning. That's quite a statement.
It is. And for him, this disconnect is critical. He believes a return to tradition, a real reconnection, is essential to avoid ruin and destruction. He warns the West is just getting lost in its own confused activity.
So it's not just like different cultures. He's arguing the West took a wrong turn. A perversion, I think was the word used in the outline.
Yes, a perversion. By abandoning fundamental universal principles, while he sees the East as having largely held on to them. It really makes you think about how foundational beliefs shape where a civilization ends up.
It really does. Okay, so if the West has deviated, lost touch with tradition, what does that mean for knowledge itself? For science? He seems to contrast contemplation and action and sacred versus profane science.
Right, that's another key opposition for him. Contemplation, which he links to the East, representing pure intellect, pure knowledge, understanding for its own sake. Action, which he sees as dominating the West. A focus on doing, changing, achieving practical results. He goes pretty far, actually. He claims Westerners have sort of lost their intellectuality, their capacity for pure understanding, by overdeveloping this urge for action.
And they invent theories to make themselves feel better about it.
That's his take, yeah. Theories that console them for this loss of deeper intellect.
Okay, so that leads to profane science. What is that exactly?
He sees it as a modern Western invention. It's science disconnected from any higher principles. It's purely speculative, focused on theories based only on observation, leading mainly to industrial inventions. Practical application is the main goal.
So science that's enclosed entirely within this world, focused only on what we can see and measure.
Precisely. Only observable reality, only quantifiable aspects. It denies or ignores anything beyond that material sphere. He argues it has no higher principle guiding it.
It sounds like he's saying our modern scientific method, our focus on data and technology, is actually part of the problem.
It is, for him. It's a symptom of that materialization he talked about. In contrast, he discusses sacred science.
Like alchemy or ancient astrology.
Exactly. Those, he argues, were part of a traditional character. They weren't just separate disciplines. Intellectual intuition, he says, lies at the root of everything. They were connected to a larger metaphysical doctrine.
So they were applications of a deeper understanding, not just techniques.
Right. They were ways of understanding the cosmos and humanity's place in it, derived from first principles. Modern science, Guénon describes it as a progressively materialized, even degenerated form of knowledge.
Degenerated, that's strong.
Yeah. He sees it leading to this monstrous accumulation of facts and details, but without real understanding. He calls it a superstition of facts, like collecting data becomes an end in itself.
And this actually promotes ignorance and agnosticism.
By limiting the scope of what's considered knowable. By focusing only on the material, it actively encourages ignorance about anything non-material, anything spiritual or metaphysical. It makes people agnostic about higher realities simply because science can't measure them.
So for Guénon, scientific progress, as we know it, is actually a deviation, leading to intellectual decline.
Yes, a declension of the West, an intellectual decline, because it's moved away from the pursuit of true universal knowledge toward fragmented, purely practical material knowledge. It really challenges the whole purpose of knowledge, doesn't it? Is it about accumulating facts and building things, or is it about deeper understanding? He suggests that by breaking knowledge into tiny pieces, we've kind of lost the big picture, lost its essence.
That's a heavy critique. And it seems like this connects to his views on the individual, too. He talks about individualism leading to social chaos. How does he make that link?
Well, he defines individualism very specifically. It's the negation of any principle higher than individuality. It's putting the individual human being with their own reason and desires at the absolute center of everything.
And he sees this as unique to the modern West.
A peculiar feature, yes. He traces its philosophical roots back to thinkers like Descartes, introducing rationalism, limiting intelligence to just human reason, cut off from anything higher.
Okay, so starting with philosophy.
Yeah.
How does that lead to social problems?
Because, Guénon argues, this focus on the individual leads inevitably to free criticism. Everyone's individual judgment becomes the ultimate authority. This means rejecting traditional authority, rejecting established hierarchies, rejecting knowledge passed down through tradition.
He mentions Protestantism here.
He points to it as an early example, yeah. Denying the authority of the church hierarchy, putting individual judgment in matters of faith first. For him, that's a key step in this individualistic direction.
And the result is social chaos.
Yes, because society loses its connection to those fundamental principles that should, in his view, organize it. Modern society, he argues, tries to base its unity purely on human factors, on agreements between individuals, which means a negation of all social hierarchy.
What about ideas like equality or democracy? We usually see those positively.
Guénon views them very critically. He sees equality as a kind of modern dogma, a misleading simplification, because in reality, individuals have different capacities. He thinks democracy, based on the idea that power comes from the masses, represents the negation of all hierarchy.
Negation of hierarchy, leading to rule by.
Rule by the ignorant and the incompetent, in his words, because it denies that some are naturally better suited to lead or possess deeper knowledge. He implies that aristocracy, ruled by the best, in the original sense, is more natural and traditional form. He also critiques how things like suggestions and propaganda easily manipulate public opinion in such a system.
Wow, so he connects philosophy, individualism, rationalism directly to social structures, democracy, rejection of hierarchy, and sees it all as a symptom of this deeper decline, this move away from tradition.
Exactly. It's fascinating, isn't it? How he argues that by focusing only on the human element, on the individual, society loses its bearings, loses its connection to higher truths, and ends up in disorder. It can't achieve any real intellectual or spiritual restoration from that position.
Okay, so pulling these threads together, the Kali Yuga decline, the East-West split, profane science replacing sacred individualism leading to chaos, it all seems to build towards this final idea, a material civilization. What's the essence of that for Guénon? Why is that the ultimate expression of this crisis?
Well, he's quite blunt about it. He says Western civilization is fundamentally materialistic. And not just that it likes material things, but that materialism is its complete mental outlook.
The whole worldview.
Yes. He hammers this point home. Modern thought, modern science is profane science. It's all enclosed entirely within this world, focused only on material reality, denying or ignoring anything beyond it.
So it's inevitable then that people become preoccupied with material things and their practical applications.
That's the logical consequence in his view. If your entire framework only recognizes the material pursuits, technology, industry, wealth, that becomes the main focus. Spiritual or purely intellectual pursuits get sidelined or completely dismissed.
And this connects back to the superstition of facts you mentioned.
Exactly. It's prioritizing empirical data, quantitative analysis, the measurable, over any kind of intuitive or principled understanding. It becomes a form of ignorance, he says, because it willfully ignores vast domains of reality.
So scientific and technological progress from this angle is just deepening the materialism.
It's seen as a deviation, yeah, resulting in a system where only material values truly count. Interestingly, he points to philosophers like Berkeley, who actually denied the independent existence of matter as paradoxically helping pave the way for this.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
By focusing the whole debate on the nature of matter and perception, even in denying it, they contributed to making it the central philosophical problem, ultimately allowing the materialistic viewpoint to sort of take over the vacuum.
Okay. So the big picture Guénon paints is a civilization whose entire way of thinking is tilted towards the tangible, the quantifiable. And this leads to a deep disconnection from, well, anything higher, from meaning itself.
That's really the heart of it, a profound disconnection from higher realities, leading to a fundamental crisis of meaning. It really pushes you to ask, what does happen when a civilization decides only the visible matters?
We've covered a lot of ground here, diving deep into René Guénon's The Crisis of the Modern World. We've looked at his really provocative arguments, this idea of the modern age as a dark age, the Kali Yuga, a time of decline, not progress.
That fundamental split he sees between Eastern and Western ways of thinking.
Right, and the shift from sacred science connected to metaphysics to profane science, focused only on the material.
The corrosive effects of individualism, leading to social chaos.
And how it all culminates in what he calls a purely material civilization. It's definitely a challenging perspective, but wow, it gives you a lot to think about.
It certainly does. It forces you to question assumptions we often take for granted.
Absolutely. And think about this. Guénon wrote the original book in 1926. The translation we discussed is from 42. That's long before the internet, before late 20th, early 21st century globalization. AI. So much has happened since.
Yeah, the ever-increasing speed might feel even more relevant now to some.
So here's something to mull over after listening. Thinking about Gamona's framework, what elements of his crisis, this materialism, this focus on action over contemplation, this individualism, do you see playing out in the world today? And maybe more fundamentally, how might looking at history through his cyclical lens, instead of our usual linear progress model, change how you view current global events?
That's a great question to leave people with. Does his framework offer any insight, even if you don't agree with all of it?
Exactly. Something to think about.